geeks, and geekettes. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic book fans from all around the world, dear friends, welcome to another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, a thought-provoking, intellectually stimulating, deep dive episode where I'm only going to answer a few questions, but I'm going to answer them in depth. And they're ones that I've actually received a few weeks ago, but I needed some time to cogitate. I don't know if that's going to make my answers any better, but well, we'll find out together, won't we? All right, Eli Zimmerman. He says, this is not so much an Ask Chuck Dixon, well, now it is, but as a devout Catholic who reverted to the faith a few years ago, I wanted to ask why you are personally a lapsed Catholic. I have mentioned that in passing a few times. Back to Eli. You speak sometimes as though you believe in the Lord, but more often you say that you were raised Catholic. Faith is, after all, a choice of free will, or it would be no choice at all. But it saddens me here that the Lord and His church are not important to others, especially one whom I respect. Ultimately, we each choose heaven or hell ourselves. I do not know the posture of your heart, so I could not know what you choose. But I will pray for you either way. We all need prayers. I will not be emailing you on the subject again. God bless you and guide you, sir. Well, thank you so much for your concern. It's very much appreciated. Why am I a lapsed Catholic, or collapsed Catholic, as I sometimes refer to it? I'm going to say it started with the guitar masses. I grew up in the Catholic Church. My sisters both went to Catholic school. I went to public school, but I went to catechism every week. I went to Confraternity of the Christian Doctrines when I got into junior high school. And that's about the time they introduced the guitar mass. Now, the guitar mass was meant to bring in the young folks. You'd have some priest up there on the altar strumming his guitar. This is, this is like post-folk music. As Martin Mull used to say, remember the folk music scare of the 60s? Yeah, that crap almost caught on. So you have this younger priest up there, and I'm not going to blame the priest. I'm going to blame the church, the American Catholic Church, because some brainiac at the top, some cardinal or archbishop or whatever, said, "Hey, we're losing the young folks, or we might lose the young folks to this whole hippie thing, and let's liven up the mass for the kids, and we'll have a guy up there playing a guitar just like Elvis." They'll think they're at a Rolling Stones concert, they're really at church. Or more like a Peter, Paul, and Mary concert, but they're still at church. Myself and everyone else of my age who were the target audience for this nonsense completely rejected it. We knew we were being pandered to. It was cringe. It was awful. We didn't, except for the dumber ones amongst us, we did not go to the guitar mass. We went, to our regular mass. And that was kind of the beginning of me. You reach an age where you start asking questions. Why am I here? Is God real? Why do I believe this? And you're supposed to do that because, as you mentioned, the Christian faith is a choice. It's not foisted upon you. You're not forced to become a Christian. You choose between being saved and not being saved. And accepting the word of God or not. And so you have these moments of doubt in which your faith is tested. But the Christian faith is so strong that it for most of us, it survives those, doubting Thomas moments where we're not sure. Our relationship with God is uncertain. And I reached that point at that age, and I really think it was spurred on by the guitar mass, because the thing that I liked about being a Catholic, and I'm still culturally a Catholic. The thing I liked being a Catholic is the mysticism. You really did feel a connection. I've been to a lot of Protestant services. Never felt that connection again. I have a problem with some of the dictates and doctrine of the Catholic Church, the way the Catholic Church openly discourages, or until recently discouraged, reading the Bible, actually learning on your own. You had to learn through their filter, through their catechisms. But that mysticism, that moment in the Mass, or that moment of communion, where you really feel in touch, you really feel the grace. I mean, honest to gosh, you feel some sort of spirit, and have never felt that at any other kind of service. Vividly remember going to the 12 Stations of the Cross, my favorite Mass, held on Good Friday. And it's very theatrical. If you've ever been to a Stations of the Cross Mass, especially one that was done right. And at our church, our little church, St Andrew's in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, they did it right. Sound effects. The church was dark, lit only by candles, while the priest went through the Stations of the Cross, the various humiliations and torments that Christ went through on the way to Calvary and his ultimate fate. And I have to say that at that Mass, I felt it. I felt a connection because it is mystical. It is supernatural. It is beyond our experience of our eyes and our ears. It's something that has to be felt. And the guitar Mass took all that away. Took all of that away. I was used to, especially at our parish, these tough Irish priests, older guys. Now, older, they might have been in their 40s. To me, they seemed ancient. But, tough Irish guys, out behind the rectory, smoking cigarettes and telling jokes. My favorite priest, who usually gave the 12:15 Mass at St. Andrew's, was Father Johns. And Father Johns is a big fan of the comic strip Peanuts. And he used to relate that Sunday, sometimes he would relate that Sunday's Peanuts cartoon to us as part of the liturgy, or as you Protestants call it, the sermon. And that meant that he read the comic strip that morning and gleaned spiritual meaning from it, which wasn't hard with Schultz. Schultz being very much a Christian guy who did not hide his light under a bushel. And Father Johns would give these really terrific sermons, which even the grown-ups in the room who weren't into Peanuts appreciated. The guy got laughs. He could work a room. While the whole time, bringing the Word of God to you. So I think that's what happened to me. Is I fell away from the church in that period, and it was a tough time for the church. The late '60s, early '70s. A lot of people were falling away. You had a lot of competition from evangelical groups, Protestant groups. You had a lot of competition from drugs. I won't lie there. You had a lot of newly minted atheists in that period, and you openly had cults. You had cults approaching people on the street. I got young people. I got approached all the time because I took a lot of mass transit back then, and you get approached by the Hare Krishnas or the Forever family, which was a cult which would whisk you away to some farm, have you making baskets, and singing about the Lord, and you weren't allowed to call home. Qualifies as a cult to me, wouldn't you say? So and then I had a natural aversion to evangelical Christians because, let's face it, I mean, if you're an evangelical Christian, you got to admit the face of evangelism in the 70s, 80s, not good, not good. You had a lot of opportunistic loonies, and even up to today, you've got this follow me, believe in Jesus, and you'll make a lot of money those kind of people, basically money lenders preaching the word of God, and that is a big turnoff. And I think that was a big turnoff to a lot of young people, probably because for a lot of young people who grew up in families that weren't particularly religious, their biggest exposure to religious figures on a regular basis were these evangelists, these Pat Robertsons and Jerry Falwells and Jimmy Swaggarts. And I'm sorry, but those guys were a big turnoff to, unless they were literally preaching to the choir, they were a big turnoff to anybody seeking a life of religiosity or contemplating questions of faith and anything, religious. And I think that hurt as well. I mean, I was fortunate enough. I mean, Billy Graham was like the only guy out there who could speak to anybody, and you knew this guy wasn't a phony baloney. He didn't come off as a phony baloney. He came off as a true believer, and his son as well. To this day, you got a lot of hucksters on TV promoting this and that. Send me, call us or send me your credit card, and I'll send you a free book. That crowd of evangelists. And then you got Franklin Graham and his TV commercials. He just comes on and talks straight to you, and you can feel it. It's genuine. You say, okay, this guy gets it. This guy has it, and he's trying to give it to me. And that's great. I mean, he has that power, and it all comes from the heart. And I wish we had more of that on a daily basis than a lot of the stuff we got from the 60s going onward. And okay, as per your question, where does that leave me? Where does that leave me? Am I lost in the wilderness? Am I all alone? Am I without faith? No, I'm not. I'm a member of the Church of Christ, which is a good, very, very fundamental, no extras, no added cereal kind of religion. It's just the basics. There's no, weird added stories, which Catholic Church adds a few stories to the New Testament that there's no documentation for. I'm sorry. Although, I mean, to backtrack a little bit, trying to explain the Catholic Church or Catholics' fascination with the Virgin Mary to a Protestant, it's really weird. It's like this is something Protestants don't get, and I don't understand why they don't get it. Now, I understand I was raised Catholic, and when you're raised Catholic, you have a reverence for the Virgin Mary, second only to your reverence for Christ and the Lord. And I explained to Protestants, I said, look, it's a good thing because this is it's not idol worship or anything like that. It's revering motherhood. It's revering the mother of Christ, and it's lifting womanhood up, which no other religion really does a whole lot of doing that. So I always saw the elevation of the Virgin Mary because you gotta love your mom. I always saw that as a good thing not only from a religious standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, the sanctity of woman and a woman's role in the universe, a woman's role in all of our lives. I always thought that was a good thing. Anyway, fear not, I am not an apostate. I'm not a heathen. I'm not an unbeliever. So, which is why, I occasionally mention religion because without going on and on about it, because I'm not a biblical scholar like most atheists claim to be. So I don't go on and on about religion the way people who claim they don't believe in it do. So, but fear not. But thank you for the prayers. And continue to pray because there is a power of prayer. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. I've seen it work. There's something there, man. There is definitely something there. Continuing on kind of the same note, Father Paul, an actual Catholic priest, I'll just read his thing. As a Catholic priest, I have seen many of the problems we have experienced in religion being mirrored in the entertainment industry. 60 plus years ago, a decision was made to begin to strip out mystery, beauty, traditional values, classical art and architecture, Latin, and the ancient hymns, all in the name of becoming more open and inclusive. At the same time, we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of people going to church and pursuing religious vocations. There is now much internal debate about if this was caused by those changes or some other factor was involved. Whenever I see pop culture entities doing similar, debasing old characters, writing for the quote unquote modern audience, turning out substandard art, I lament that we still haven't learned that this doesn't work. Our younger people at church now tend to like all the old stuff, and it seems to be true in comics as well. Even in a modern comic where the artist draws a religious scene, it seems to always be set in some Gothic cathedral with a priest wearing a cassock. Apparently, even SJW comic writers long for the old ways, at least regarding religion. Father Paul continues, do you think that the religious changes of the 1960s led to the political and cultural changes we see now, or was it just a part of what was happening in the whole world and this was just inevitable? Again, Father Paul agrees with me. No less an authority than an ordained Catholic priest agrees with me that the guitar masses were the beginning of the end. I remember going to High Mass, and High Mass was in Latin, and I really liked High Mass. My problem with High Mass was it was longer than regular Mass, so I didn't always go to High Mass. I was a 12:15 Mass kind of guy. And when I got older, our Confraternity of the Christian Doctrines class was at 11, so couldn't go to High Mass. I had to go to the 12:15. And that's where they dropped the guitar mass, the guy up on the altar with the guitar. And yeah, I think, absolutely. I mean, you know that, Father. You know that taking this all away. And I've seen the same reports you have that young people returning to the Catholic Church. And apparently these are significant numbers of young people turning back to the Catholic Church. They want what the Protestants call that old time religion. And by old time religion, that means Latin. That means, chants. That means all of it, cassocks and altar boys and candles and all that stuff. They want it all back. They want the mysticism, which I talked about earlier. That mysticism that I miss. That mysticism that I don't see or feel in the Protestant church. Maybe I should start my own religion. Get out your checkbook. I'm going to start my own religion. Has lots of mysticism, but not some of the complications I see in the Catholic Church. So I'm sure Father Paul's going, well, I wonder what they are. We need a further discussion, my friend. So anyway, yes, I just think I'm not going to blame what the church did. I'm not going to blame the guitar mass for the devolution of pop culture, devolution of entertainment, art, and all the rest of it in this country. I'm going to lay the blame on the communists. That's who did it. That's who did it to us. Communists in the public school system, and which led to communists everywhere because they were graduating lots and lots of communists, especially into the arts. It wouldn't do them a whole lot of good to have a bunch of engineering graduates who were Marxists. But education and media and broadcasting, yes, because there's the stated goals of the communist movement worldwide. And you can say, well, Chuck, you're into all these conspiracies. No, it's the communist influence in the United States prior to World War II, from the 1920s onward. It's not a conspiracy. It's an understanding. They don't have meetings, in subterranean layers discussing their next plans. They all know the plans. It's an understanding. They have the same goal. They have the same beliefs. They have the same marching orders, even though there's no one telling them to march anymore. There was a Soviet guy high up in KGB, who's written a number of books about this uh, post the fall of the Soviet Union, in which he talks about that their plans for America succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Uh, but it took until a couple of generations after the fall of the Soviet Union for it to take hold, for those little red diaper dober babies to grow up and actually move into positions of power in politics, in entertainment, in education, and elsewhere. So, of course, you're going to see this devolution, atheism, and all the rest of it. Suicidal empathy, creeping socialism, all the rest. And this is going to affect things. And it has. We've seen it. My beloved Batman and Robin just torn apart. Um, Comics have been ruined by identity politics, sexual politics, all the rest, and largely ruined by people who don't even love comics. They see comic books, movies, television, music as a way to get their agenda across, a way to get their message across. And they keep on sending that message out, even though it's obvious from the numbers that nobody wants to hear it. No one wants to hear these messages. Comic book sales fall. Recently, the streaming services are seeing a diaspora of people either cutting back to only one streaming service at a time or just getting out of streaming altogether. And that coincides with a rise in the return of people buying physical media. And when you see people buying physical media, it means they want more choice. They are choosing what they bring into their home rather than just accepting whatever is being blasted at them through the television via streaming or whatnot. So, but they keep trying, and they're going to keep trying. And we keep hearing that, oh, it's the end of woke, but I don't see the end of woke. I mean, they're producing television shows, and they're saying these blockbuster, millions of dollars spent on each episode of some streaming offering, and it gets, there are local news stations in Des Moines, Iowa, that get more viewers, but they keep on going. Where the money comes from, who knows? But they've done it over and over again to so many different franchises. Star Wars. I was an enormous Star Wars fan. You couldn't find a bigger Star Wars fan. I wouldn't watch a Star Wars movie, under any circumstances. If I was in traction in a hospital, I would awaken from a coma to change the channel if a Star Wars movie came on, because once again, it was they handed control of Star Wars and Star Trek and every other beloved franchise over to people who didn't care, didn't love them, didn't certainly didn't like the fans of these, and the end result is this mess that no one wants to watch. Only diehards want to keep watching this stuff. Even the people who claim that you should be watching it aren't watching it because it's tedious, boring, cringeworthy stuff. And this goes across every other franchise. All of you, Father Paul included, you probably quake in horror when you hear that one of your favorite movies or television shows is going to be revived. Because you're like, oh no, what are they going to do to it? It's like finding out that a kidnapped loved one that you assumed dead for years is now found alive and has been re-kidnapped by even worse people. I mean, it's a tortured analogy, but you understand what I'm saying. So, and the end thing is what I said at the beginning. Art used to be made by people who loved art. Movies were made by people who loved movies. TV was made by people who loved TV. Comics were made by people who loved comics. It's just not so anymore. So much of the stuff we're watching is made by opportunists and careerists and people who simply have a mercantile approach to what they're producing. Where's the money? And in some cases, let's hide the money. So much of the entertainment industry is money laundering. I think it's like an open secret. I think everybody knows this. When you see them spend, $300 million on a movie, they know they're never going to get the money back. Well, somebody made money and somebody washed a lot of money. So that's not going to make me popular in Hollywood. But as I always say, when you say these things about people in Hollywood, the people in Hollywood you're talking about are going, well, he's not talking about me. No, it's never you. You're fine. It's everybody else who's crooked or lazy or whatever. Uh, so that's where we are. Empty pews, empty movie theaters. There's a correlation. Absolutely a correlation. You nailed it, Father. You got it. But don't blame the church. I'm not going to blame the church. They were fighting against the tide. They're fighting against an invisible enemy. They're still fighting against an invisible enemy. We're all fighting against an invisible enemy. And if you're hearing this and saying, Chuck, you're some sort of conspiracy nutbag, might I remind you of COVID? So, did you get vaxxed? So, anyway, pretty heavy episode, huh? Heavy. I mean, Chuck, I thought you were going to talk about comic books. Well, sort of I am. I am, because I love comic books. And I don't want to see them die. I want to see them go on. All right. Well, the father gets a twin spin because he deserves it. And this is a little lighter, fans. And this shows Father Paul's bona fides. He's a comic book guy. He's not just dropping in here, checking out the room, seeing who's naughty and nice. He likes comics. He loves comics. So Father Paul says, I heard a rumor that Dollar Tree is going to start carrying comics, and sure enough, it's true. Here's a picture of a kiosk full of New 52 and Rebirth titles. Was someone at DC listening to you? Is this a sign the industry is moving back to the spinner rack model? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this development. I don't think this is the picture you sent me. I think I found my own picture that was clearer. Anyway, it's great. It's great. What are these going for? A $1.25, and I think it's a bundle. I haven't stopped in the dollar store to look, but it's like a bundle of comics from recent years, recent decade or so. And that's cool. $1.25, kid buys a comic. That's awesome. I'm all for getting comics out everywhere you can. Now, the sad thing is, I want to do a Circle K. If you ever know Circle K, Circle K, they should just call it the K Circle of Hell. It's the worst convenience store on the planet. And I saw this same display, same bagging, everything else, but they had them marked up to like $3.49. It's like, okay, this defeats the purpose. Purpose was to get cheap comics in the hands of kids. And was this like an effort from DC to get out there? Or are they just getting rid of a bunch of old inventory? I think it's maybe a 50-50. Because they have in recent months seemed to be making an effort to get out there. If you go to Ollie's, they got these bags of comics now. I saw somebody posted on Facebook. It was a display of Conan comics, and these were Conan comics from like the 80s and 90s, and they were in bags. Now that's awesome. That's awesome marketing, and I bet they sell a ton of them because who doesn't like Conan? So you get these thicker bags at Ollie's for look at this, $4.99, $5.99 for basically a mini stack of comics. And again, is this an effort? Yeah, but Ollie's is kind of a remainder for graphic novels. If you wait a year, that omnibus you wanted will show up at Ollie's, deeply discounted. I'm always happy when I go into Ollie's and I don't see a lot of my stuff. Because it's like, okay, well, my stuff sold through. Either that or it sold the first day they put it on the shelf at Ollie's. Either way, I'm happy. So, but there's a lot of pistol hot, amazing, fantastic, colossal, blockbuster projects that are available on pallet loads at Ollie's. Books that apparently did not sell all that well. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but it's my show. I think it's great. I think it's great to see these things out there in the wild, to see comics available for kids in an affordable form, so that they at least get to see a comic and make up their own mind. Is this something I want to get into or not? And I think that's cool. I like that a whole bunch. Um, Now, when I say that I think that DC in particular and Marvel to a certain extent are making an effort, more encouraging is, when I go to Publix, I'm seeing these, those magazines they put out, like, The Life of Elvis, Michael Jackson, James Bond, The World of James Bond. It's just this big, thick, square bound magazine for like $15. I, uh, I'm seeing more from DC than from Marvel, regular collections. I just saw one of Justice League, and it's like 80 pages of Justice League comics for $15, which is a little cheaper than if you actually bought the comics, and it's oversized and the reproduction's gorgeous and everything else. I've seen Batman, I've seen Superman, I've seen one from Marvel, Spider-Man. There may have been more, but that I've only seen one Marvel book. And it's encouraging because they used to do these magazines, and it would be, the life of Superman, and it'd be all about the movies and TV shows, and but no comics. And now, very wisely, they're putting comics, and I've seen them now, like on a regular bi-monthly basis from DC. So I'm assuming they're profitable. Back when there was a Batman and Robin magazine, or Batman and Superman magazine available on the newsstand, that thing used to sell 500,000 copies a month. If these magazines are doing anywhere near that, it's a great sign that comics are getting into the hands of kids, or even adults who are like, oh, I remember comics. I'll pick this up. But in any case, comics are getting distributed more widely again, even if on a limited basis. I don't know if that makes any sense. They're widely distributed on a limited basis, but they're but they're more widely distributed than they were before, which was not at all. You went to the newsstand, at your drugstore or supermarket, and you never saw any comics except Archie digests. And now you're seeing more stuff from the big two. And I'd like to see more and more stuff. I thought the other day that if you did a magazine format reprinting of the EC comics, I think that would do well. I think, that sort of retro, because the stories are still good, the art's still gorgeous, and the covers are still compelling. They should give that a shot. Just one time, maybe around Christmas or around Halloween, even better, and see if that sells. I bet it would. I'll bet you anything. Well, not anything. Okay, Alyssa Lopez. She's got a question, and this is another deep dive. What are your thoughts on Stan Lee and the quiet controversy that always seems to surround him? Do you think he gets too much credit? Not enough? Would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, Stan Lee. He's synonymous with comic books. If you talk about comic books, I mean, not you, you're a comic book fan, you might talk about anything. You might start talking about Bernie Krigstein. But when normies and the media talk about comic books, only one name gets mentioned, Stan Lee. He is the be all end all, the alpha and omega, to stay on a religious track, of comics. Everybody knows him from the cameos. The media has made sure his name is associated not just with Marvel, but with comic books in general. And of course, over the course of his career, Stan was always this. He was always out in front. He was always willing to go on talk shows. He was always willing to make public appearances outside of the comic book realm. He was, for all intents and purposes, the ambassador to comics. He talked them up. He promoted them. He marketed them. He promoted them as an American art form, and in that I believe he was sincere, absolutely sincere, because his whole life he was about comics. He didn't do anything else. But there is controversy, and I'm going to explain some of it. And I'm going to go back to the beginning. This guy, Martin Goodman, just happened to be Stan Lee's uncle. And Martin Goodman was a publisher. And he would either be in partnership or have his own company. He bought and sold companies, and he bought and sold. He sold companies and bought them back. I mean, his you know his history in publishing is like a Rorschach test. I mean, it's crazy. This guy was in and out, over here, over there, and if any trend popped up, this guy was at the bleeding edge of it every single time. Smart businessman, seat of your pants, mercantile, guy wanted to make money. Now, he starts in pulps, and pulps were huge in the 30s. Big sellers, big money. You pay, some down and out guy who, to hack out a bunch of stories for you for a penny a word, and you sell it for 15 cents, 10 cents, whatever you could get on cheapest paper imaginable. And in a lot of cases, these pulp houses owned their own printing presses. And it was just nothing but money. And if you could license it beyond the pulp, they made a movie out of it, a movie serial, a radio show, or whatever, it was all gravy. So lots of money to be made there. Martin Goodman was all in the middle of that. Now, as the pulps begin to fade away, and you've heard the story before, printing presses are having free time. You never want free time on a printing press because no money's getting made. Printing press is idle. You're not producing stuff that people are going to buy. And so they begin publishing comics. And Martin Goodman is in the middle of this new venture called Timely Comics. And he's pumping out, all kinds of comic books for the kiddies. The ones that hit are the superheroes. He's got Submariner, he's got Human Torch, he's got the Vision, he's got Captain America, and all these characters that you still know and love, created back then to keep them presses rolling. This is where Stan Lee comes in. Now, he didn't look like this. This is cool as hell, 70s Stan. But Stan is his nephew. And according to legend, at 17 years old, Stan goes to work for his uncle, and they need people to write these comics. So they started hiring, guys to write the comics. And Stan's like, well, I can, I'll fill in. I can write some. That's what I'm going to do. Stan ends up basically running the comic book division for his uncle because he's so ambitious and prolific and hardworking. Okay. You can say what you want about Stan. Even his detractors can't take away. This guy worked like a slave for Marvel Comics. He really did. And I've heard story after story, legendary, from comic book creators who worked alongside him, how tireless this guy was. The hours that he put in, that nothing stopped him from getting the work in. And if he couldn't do it, he hired someone to do it. And when Stan called out for help, that meant, man, there's a lot of work to be done. Even Stan can't keep up with this output. So Stan goes to work writing, hiring other writers, hiring artists, putting his stuff together, plotting the course for what would become Atlas Comics. And Atlas Comics, enormously successful, enormously prolific. The theory of redundant publishing, which Stan probably learned from his uncle, was whatever's hot at the moment, you print more of that. If it's war, you do war comics. And the war comic sales begin to fade, you do westerns. And the western comic sales begin to fade, you do 3D. When 3D fades, you do horror. When horror fades, you do funny animal. I mean, Atlas jumped on everything. I think Atlas had 3 different titles that were Dennis the Menace knockoffs. I mean, whatever was hot at the time, and Dennis the Menace was huge in the 50s. Whatever was hot at the time, Marvel was there to either imitate it or join in that genre. I mean, when they tried to revive superheroes in the 50s and it failed, they jumped out of that so quick. They're like, okay, it's not working. Jungle Comics, kids want Jungle Comics. And Stan's there and he writes lots of them, and he hires people like Hank Chapman and other guys to write as well. And they put out an astonishing number of titles every month. And they are just rolling. And what's even more helpful for them is they're being distributed by the same outfit that distributed Dell Comics. Now, Dell was a division of Delacorte Press, which did, you know, crossword puzzle books and paperbacks. It was basically a rival of Martin Goodman, but they were more upscale. Dell Comics were, you know, they were upscale comics. You know, they never went to the Comics Code. They were too, you know, Comics Code. We don't need the Comics Code. We've always been wholesome entertainment for America's families, and they just, you know, went their own course, distributed their own books, and they brought Marvel along kind of as counter programming. Like, here's a sort of like down market, lowbrow comics. The kids, they like them too, so we're going to distribute them. We're going to make some more. We're going to make some money off of that. Well, that was great for Martin Goodman and for Stan Lee, because Marvel or Atlas Comics were getting wide distribution. There they were on the spin rack with the Dell Comics. And everything was gravy. Everything was wonderful. And then the bottom fell out. I should say that at the same time, Martin Goodman jumps into the paperback racket. Paperbacks, enormous, the 50s into the 60s. And he's there with, you know, Cheap Jack, you know, really below par kind of stuff, you know, either reprinting public domain stuff or hiring authors nobody else would touch. And at the same time all this is going on, he's also doing men's sweat magazines, highly profitable. Men's sweat magazines were men's action. You know, I fought 1,000 Japanese and lived. You know, I survived in a crocodile swamp for 6 months. You know, I dated every woman in Hollywood. You know, those kind of stories are real men stories. And we called them sweat magazines when I was a kid, because there was always some sweaty guy on the cover, generally without a shirt. And he made a fortune putting out, you know, various men's sweat magazines aimed at basically got World War II vets, you know, and younger. And then he also got into the men's magazine. Martin Goodman got into the men's magazine racket with Swank and a bunch of other titles. Playboy was a publishing phenomenon when it came out and grew to be like huge. And Martin Goodman's like, yeah, we want a piece of that. And he started doing Swank, and Swank survived, you know, all the way into the 60s, I believe into the early 70s, as sort of, again, a lowbrow, down market Playboy, you know, Playboy for people who couldn't afford the extra 50 cents to buy Playboy. And just that kind of deal. So anyway, everything's going great for Martin Goodman. He's jumping from one thing to another, whatever. But here's Stan. He's trapped in comics. And everything's wonderful. Everything's gravy as long as Delacorte Press, Dell Comics are distributing him. But one day, Dell drops it. They decide they're going to go even more highbrow. And they're going to have their own not spin rack, but their own display case. Some of them were made out of wood. I remember seeing them, and they're always at the upscale drugstores. So they had a metal one, they had a wood one. I'm not going to get to all that, although I'd love to own one. So Dell decided we're only going to distribute Dell. You know, your comics, your crappy little comics. We're not interested in them anymore. They're bringing down the brand, Stan. So we're leaving you behind. Martin Goodman, sorry, we're going to break this sweetheart deal we got with you. We're going off on our own, and we're just going to distribute our own comics and nobody else's. And we're really going to brand ourselves at the drugstores and the newsstands. This leaves Marvel with nothing. No way to get their comics to market, and a huge inventory. Remember, they had been extremely prolific in publishing. So they would stack up months and months and months of inventory because to feed this monster machine of all of these various titles they were doing, which were selling through, which were doing great. Now, all of a sudden, they got no distributor. So they have to go around. Martin Goodman has to go around with his hat in his hand. He eventually ends up with National Periodical Publications, and they'll distribute it. In case you don't know, NPP was DC Comics. National Periodic Publications distributed DC Comics. And so they say, okay, yeah, we'll distribute your books. And they work out a deal, but we're not distributing all these titles. You got to cut back. You got to cut down. to X number of titles, a fraction of what they were putting out before. Because we're not just going to distribute. Because, why? Because they saw Atlas as a competitor. I mean, they're far more directly competitor with DC than they ever were with Dell. So they're doing, you've got House of Mystery at DC, you've got Tales of Suspense at Marvel, you've got All-Star Western at DC, you got Rawhide Kid at Marvel, Atlas. So more of a direct, our Army at War, Atlas has Battle comics. So you see, they're going head to head on the newsstand. So DC says, yeah, we'll carry you, but you got to cut your titles way back, buddy. So they do. And it's a disaster because they have all this inventory they have to eat, all this inventory they're carrying. So they can't hire anybody. They just cut back on everything. Took everything down. And a lot of guys are hitting the street. They're going to look for other comic work. They're going back to advertising. They're getting out of comics entirely because there ain't no work anymore because Atlas isn't hiring. They're not buying new stories because they got too many. And they begin packaging and repackaging and, whatever, trying to work some kind of magic to get some kind of mojo going, get sales up, get past that DC barrier of low distribution, fewer titles, because DC wasn't giving them primo distribution. And I know this when I was a kid. Marvel comics were hard to find. You had to go from drugstore to drugstore to drugstore to keep up with Spider-Man. They were hard to find. Either they weren't putting many copies out, or they weren't putting copies out at all, or it was just very spotty distribution. Whereas Spider-Man, or no, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Sergeant Rock, you'd never miss an issue. They were everywhere. So Marvel was getting short shrift. Now, what happens? What happens? Well, this story was told to me by Gene Colan, eyewitness to the birth of Marvel Comics, to the birth of what we know now as Stan Lee's universe, Stan Lee's Marvel Comics. Gene Colan, comic artist extraordinaire. You might know him from Tomb of Dracula, Daredevil. I knew him at the time from Submariner. When I was a kid, he drew Submariner. His name Adam Austin because he didn't want the people at DC Comics getting mad at him. Like you couldn't tell it was Gene Austin, or you couldn't. I'm mixing the names up. You couldn't tell it was Gene Colan. So, I mean, talk about a guy with an idiosyncratic style. Nobody's ever looked like Gene Colan except Gene Colan. So anyway, Gene Colan told me this story. He said that he did an issue of he went up to what was then Marvel. They had changed the name to Marvel Comics. Goodman was always changing the name of the company. He's always changing the name of the holding companies. He was always buying companies, starting new ones, changing the name, re-registering, whatever. And probably something to do with taxes, or who knows what was going on with Mr. Goodman. But he there were times when, you might see a new company owning Marvel every month for 2 years. Very, very weird. I remember, what was it, Cadence? He's like running out of words in the dictionary, naming these companies. Anyway, Gene Colan goes around to Marvel and he meets with Stan, and there's almost nobody there because, they're down on their knees financially. And Stan says, Gene, I got no work for you. I'm not hiring anybody. Quite frankly, I think we're going to go out of business. Our sales are down. We're having a tough time with distribution. We need breakout hits. We can't keep doing what we're doing before. We're going to take one last chance, one Hail Mary pass to get back in the game. And he goes, so I'm letting everybody go. I'm not hiring any freelancers except Jack, Steve, and Don. And we're gonna try something. And if it doesn't work, we're out of business for good. So I'm really sorry. And I'm not going to tell the whole story because I've told it before. But Gene Colan walks out of his office heartbroken, but ends up calling DC Comics, and he gets a job doing a Sea Devil story. And from there, he was at DC for a while doing different stuff until he came back to Marvel in better days, which we're not long in coming. So Jack and Steve and Don, of course, refers to Jack Kirby, powerhouse, Marvel Universe, the nuclear reactor, the heart, the true heart of Marvel Comics. And Steve Ditko, the rarely photographed Steve Ditko, who, come on, Steve Ditko created Spider-Man. All right, there's your first controversy. Controversy starting to rear its ugly head in the story of Stan Lee. And Don Heck, great guy, journeyman artist. Didn't particularly like drawing superheroes, but he ends up long association with Iron Man. And Stan keeps these guys because he knew they'll churn the work out. But Kirby's pretty much acting almost as art director. He's driving a lot of this stuff. He's drawing a lot of the covers. He's presenting a lot of the concepts. So everything really goes back to Kirby except Spider-Man. And that's where we are. Now, what happens is Stan's writing everything. He's literally writing every book that comes out. And Millie the Model, Two Gun Kid, whatever it is, he's writing it. And he's overwhelmed by the amount of work, plus the worries of keeping a company going. Remember, he's on the business end as well. I mean, his day job is not writing comics. His day job is running a comic book company, handling all kinds of problems, putting out fires all day long. And so he relies heavily on Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, mostly on Jack Kirby, because of the number of titles, to drive the train. They would discuss plot lines. Stan might write a plot line. In case of Spider-Man, Stan didn't write any plot lines. Steve Ditko came up with all the plot lines, and we have the proof of that. That Steve Ditko would write out outlines for the stories, page breakdowns, what would happen, what was coming up in issues. He would outline like the next 6 months of continuity, everything else. He did his due diligence. He was a comic book writer. He wrote these Spider-Man comics. Kirby virtually wrote them. He wrote them as he drew them. Things would just come to him. Kirby was a certified genius. And this stuff would just come to him. The pencil would hit the paper, and the next thing you knew, the Fantastic Four were in a death struggle over the fate of the planet with Galactus. And now you go, well, now Stan would get it, and he would dialogue it. But he would have notes. He would have note written in the gutters. From Ditko, he would have copious notes about the issue, about character motivation, what this is going to happen, that happens, what it means, all the rest of it. Now, it was up to Stan to provide the dialogue for these things, and that's what he did. And you go, well, yeah, but did he really write it? He just wrote the dialogue. Stan's contribution to these things was heart. He really brought heart to it. Kirby, great artist, great storyteller, but very much a technician. Okay. Not a lot of subtlety and nuance, particularly in this period. Stan brings that. Ditko and others are very, pragmatic, very direct in their storytelling. Lee brings a kind of subtlety and humor to it. I mean, could you possibly imagine J. Jonah Jameson written by anybody else? Think about it. Even Peter Parker written by anybody else. Yes, I know that Peter Parker is very much a personal statement for Steve Ditko. It's very close to his heart. There's a lot of Steve Ditko in that character. But Stan brings him to life. Stan gives these characters the emotional range, which separated them from all the other characters. Now, when the artists see what Stan is doing, they build on it. They get it. They get that he's creating these characters where there's this pathos, there's this certain level of tragedy to them, which really makes them relatable and sympathetic and engaging. And the artists get this, and they build on that. They build on what Stan is doing. So there is a collaboration going on here, even though the creative engine is largely driven by the artist out of necessity, because Stan is too freaking busy. And quite frankly, he can't have the guys doing Millie the Model running those stories because God knows what they would come up with. Okay. But in the superhero genre, he knows Ditko and Kirby, they know what they're doing, and then they'll assist other artists that are brought on board as well. So when you read these stories, you're getting that underlayment from the artist. You're getting the power of the art under it. But it's Stan who's bringing you back every month because he's giving the stories that emotional weight, that relatability, bring them back every month. And you can't take that away from the man. You cannot take that away from the man. And again, people go, well, Stan went around saying, I created this, I created that. Yes, he did. But for years and years and years, and I saw every television appearance that went national, I saw Stan. Stan always tried to give Jack and Steve credit, always mentioned their names, always said, well, I didn't do it alone. I had a great team of artists. And he would start dropping artist names. This guy created this, and this guy helped with that. But he's being interviewed in normie media, and they didn't care. They don't know how comic books are made. As far as they knew, Stan wrote, drew them, and stapled them together. They didn't know there was anybody else involved. They didn't care that there was anybody else involved. But Stan would always make that effort. All the way up to the end, Stan would make that effort to include Jack and Steve. But every once in a while, you're doing interview after interview, especially when he gets involved with the movies, and you're spending a whole day sitting in the same chair talking to 90 different reporters on remote. You're talking to some guy from Kankakee, Channel 9, Action News, Kalamazoo. And you're talking to this guy and you're answering the same stupid questions all day long and everything else. And eventually you're going to go, yeah, I created the Marvel Universe. Yeah, I created Spider-Man. Yeah, I created him. I created it all. I created Superman, for God's sakes. I created him. You name it, I created it because you just get tired. I've been in the same position. I co-created, I almost said I created Bane. I co-created Bane with Graham Nolan. And I always give Graham credit. But when you're in a normie interview, they don't care about Graham Nolan. They don't want to know who Graham Nolan is. And Graham Nolan says the same thing. That every once in a while you'll just go, F it. Okay, I created Bane. Because that's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear about Bane's co-creation. You don't care about Bane's co-creation. You don't care that it was a collaborative effort. You're talking to me, so it's got to be all about me. And Graham will tell you the same thing, that he said, yeah, every once in a while I'll just say I created Bane, and we understand that's the way it goes. So when people point to that with Stan, the egomaniac or blah, 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 it's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? The people talking to you don't care. They don't care how comics are made. They don't want to be educated. They don't want to hear about collaboration. They want to hear it's all you because you're the guy they're interviewing and they feel important because they're interviewing you. And if you're going to sit there making yourself less important than you are, they don't want to hear about that. So Stan played the game. But remember, Stan was out there. He was out there. I remember him on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. And he took a beating on that show. He took a beat. Tom Snyder hated comics. They had Carmine Infantino on. Here's a little story for you. Stan Lee, Carmine Infantino, talking to Tom Snyder, 12:30 at night, or 1 o'clock in the morning used to come on. And following the Tonight Show, they're sitting on Tom Snyder's set, and Stan's going on about comics. We're creating comics for grown-ups. College students are reading them. We're making the medium more sophisticated. Now, I'm a young guy eating all this up. I'm like, yeah, Stan, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're growing comics. We're growing the comic book audience. We're going to make it bigger. We're going to make it so that people read comic books again. We're going to save this medium, this great American medium. And he's into it. He's passionate. I'm right there with him. And then Snyder says to Carmine Infantino, so how do you feel about comic books? And Infantino says, yeah, they're good to read on the toilet. That's what he said. They're good. They're good to read. If you need something to read on the toilet, read a comic book. And Stan looks like crushed. Then to make matters worse, Tom Snyder brings on Spider-Man's #1 fan, who they dug up out of the woodwork. Stan doesn't. This is like a nightmare episode of This Is Your Life. Stan doesn't know this is coming. They bring on this. Just imagine the geekiest geeky kid you can imagine. You know, about 16 years old, and he's into Spider-Man, and he's the rest of the interview, and he just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks and takes up all the oxygen in the room. Meanwhile, Stan looks like, you know, he's got that Stan Lee smile on his face, but you can see it in his eyes. He would like to murder this kid and then flee to South America. And then to add insult to injury, and pour a gallon of salt into the wound, at the end of the segment, which wasn't the entire show, Tom Snyder says, very, very serious, much more seriously than he talked about comic books. He said, and when we come back from commercial, we're going to talk to a man who talks to plants. And Tom treated that guy like he was Einstein. But Stan was out there, man. Stan was slugging. Stan was the ambassador to comics. He was the face of comics. I don't think he wanted to become the god of comics that the media turned him into, but that's what happened. And, you know, like I say, hardworking guy, but he's the guy that brought you the heart. He's the guy that made Marvel Comics. Now, post Ditko, post Lee, or post Kirby, in my opinion, comics never reached that pinnacle again. Because Stan wasn't up to the job without those guys. Most of the work after that is kind of derivative or repetitive. We don't come up with too many lasting characters for Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and the rest. And he starts bringing on other less talented writers to follow. And it all kind of, you know, comes apart until Jim Shooter takes over and starts taking the line more seriously. But you can't take away that the guy was all about Marvel, that he was dedicated from the time he left high school to the day he died, dedicated to the proliferation not only of Marvel Comics, but of comics in general. And are there things about him? You hear stories about this, you hear stories about that. I think they kind of fade into insignificance given his, you know, what he did for the business, what he did for comics. I think it's pretty safe to say, you know, I mean, you know, we voted with our dimes and our nickels back then, and we voted for Marvel Comics, and because of Stan. That was the other thing about Stan, is he reached out to the reader in a way that no other comic book company did. We felt a connection, I'm talking as a kid, to Marvel Comics because Stan Lee congratulated us on our good taste in buying his comics. That we were discerning comic book readers. We were special. We were different. We were the cream of the crop of comic book fans, and he appreciated us. And all the people in the bullpen appreciated us because we were special. And that connected. It really did. It you know, when he came up with all those names, Fearless, Faithful One, and all the rest of it, you wanted to earn those titles. You wanted to be Spider-Man's #1 fan. You wanted to be the big fan. You wanted to communicate. And if you wrote to the comics, a lot of times you'd hear back from him. I wrote a letter once and got a postcard back from Stan Lee, signed by Stan Lee. And the no prizes, I won a bunch of no prizes. You get a little postcard. Here's your no prize. You know, you won nothing. Just won this postcard. And speaking of the bullpen, he built that system, that crazy, frenzy bullpen system that I got to witness, that lasted all the way up into the 2000s of this, you know, the company was built around this centrifuge of comic book production and paste stuff and all the rest of it. And it was always going like, I always thought that the Marvel bullpen always looked like a big city newsroom when they just found out the president had been assassinated. And it was like that all the time. You got off the elevators and it was this buzz, it was this craziness. I mentioned this just recently. I once saw two editors coloring a cover. One was starting at the top, one starting at the bottom because it had to go out within like the hour. The watercolors were probably still dry on the cover as it was shoved into the FedEx box. But this is a system. This is the environment that he existed in, and you can kind of feel that in Marvel Comics at their heyday, at their height. There's this energy. There's this magic to them that DC, I'm sorry, never had. I mean, I worked for DC for a very long time. DC was a marvelous group of characters, amazing group of creators, often the same creators that working at Marvel, but you never felt that energy. You never felt that oomph that you got out of Marvel. And that existed post Ditko, post Kirby. So who else could it be? It was Stan. It was Stan Lee was always there. And I'm not a Stan worshiper or anything else, but I worked with Stan twice on projects, and he always treated me right. He treated me like an equal, which he didn't have to. He was still creative. I mean, this was, I guess he was in his 80s at this point, still creative, still knew how to work a comic book page, still understood dialogue, plot development. He was there. He was the Stan of before. There was nothing taken away. And he still loved comics. He still loved comics. And for that, I think he deserves all the plaudits and legendary status that he has. For that, he did. You can say, well, he might have bent the rules here or used somebody poorly, but in comics, come on. They would use people up and throw them to the gutter as quick as possible, and they still do. Comics is a mean, cutthroat business. And even worse now that it's become political, which it never was under Stan. Who knows what Stan's politics were? You never knew. It didn't matter. He didn't. I suspect I know what his politics were, but you never knew. You never knew. He understood everybody buys comics. I want everybody to buy his comics. I want everybody to love Marvel. I want everybody to want to be Spider-Man, regardless of who they voted for. So, yeah, that's my take on Stan Lee. And I told you the whole story from the beginning. From the very beginning, the origin of Stan Lee right up to his unfortunate passing. But he lived a great life, and he earned it because he worked really, really, really hard. Hey, St. Jude's. A moment about St. Jude's. I got this book, this third Conan novel, which I can't sell to you. We got a cease and desist order, and the folks at Titan and the Howard Estate said, hey, you don't own this character. You can't be publishing books about him. So the first two books we had to stop publishing, and the third book we never got to publish at all. It's called Pit of the Blind God. Conan is taken prisoner. He's a mercenary in a big, huge freaking battle with mammoths. He's taken prisoner and made a slave to this really, really weird cult that are trying to resurrect one of the elder ones. So you get lots of war action at the beginning of this story. And then you get creepy Lovecraft stuff at the end. Epic, creepy, violent Lovecraft stuff at the end. All written by me. And is, and again, I love Conan, love Robert E. Howard. But I can't sell you this, but I can give it to you. I can give it to you. I can give you my uncorrected manuscript, watermarked, as you see here, with a drawing by me. And you can get that by going to Subscribestar. And Subscribestar is a service where you basically you subscribe for $5. Now you can cancel it after a month. I don't care. I understand. That's probably what most people are going to do. But I want to know who gets these. That's the thing for me. And I can keep track of that through Subscribestar. And in addition to your $5 at Subscribestar, I want you to give at least $10. And some of you have been far more far more generous than that, and I very much appreciate it. Once you give $10 to St. Jude's, St. Jude's Hospital, they cure cancer. They treat kids for cancer. They make kids with cancer comfortable, and give them a clean place with cutting edge science, the best doctors. And here's the best part: their parents never receive a bill. You're paying to cure these kids. You're paying to help these parents out. And they're in the middle of the worst nightmare any parent can have. Their child is down with a serious, life-threatening illness. And the only road out is St. Jude's. And you can make that happen. And get a Conan book. What could be simpler? What could be easy? You know you want to read it. And this is, as far as I know, this is the only way you're going to get to read it, because it's been a couple of years and I really haven't heard anything from Titan. Maybe if you people buy enough of this, Titan will listen and actually publish the book. I don't know. But it's a way to get their attention, maybe. Or maybe they're not listening. I don't know. Anyway, you get to help the kids. I get to get this book into the hands of somebody to read it other than me and Vox Day and Mike Hutchinson, who proofed it. No author wants to write a book and only 2 other people read it. I want people to read it. I'm proud of it. I wrote 3 Conan novels, and this is by far the best of the 3 in my own opinion. Maybe you disagree, but you got to read it to let me know, don't you? So please think about it. You know, I know I'm pushing hard here, but you folks have raised a lot of money for St. Jude's through this, through different things that I've asked you to donate for. So many of you have always come through and raised quite a bit of money. Quite a bit of money. You'd probably be stunned. I think we're up over $15,000 over the years. You know, if you people sending in $5, $10, and I got $1,000 from a guy last week. $1,000. You people are awesome. So let's do it. Let's do it again, and I'll send you that Conan script by return email. The directions for how to do all of this are at the Subscribestar site, and I will provide a link below. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com, the most reliable way to reach me. Well, thanks for listening to this. Well, apparently, I'm looking at the timer, extra length episode of Chuck Dixon. I probably got you 2 working back, yapping in your ear about Stan Lee and the Catholic Church and all those other kind of things. And thanks for the incredible questions, Eli. And oh my gosh, I'm forgetting your name, ma'am. Alyssa Lopez, and Father Paul, of course. And hopefully I'll see all of you down the road.